Hey guys, my name is Locodoco, the better looking host of Listen Loco, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
This is going to be another episode of Reflections. And my guest for this one is going to be Dylan Falco, the head coach of G2 Esports, but obviously has also worked with a number of other teams. Schalke would be one, for example. So Dylan, actually on this interview, the place I want to start is before you were a coach, because a lot of people who are just fans won't know this. Maybe the TSM faithful will be aware, but obviously you actually got your start working as some kind of an analyst with TSM. And even before that, actually, you know this, I actually remember reaching out to you when there was another guy called Mark, who isn't in esports anymore, so we won't bother with alias, but there was two guys doing a similar sort of thing, and you made a video, I remember, that was about it was actually about TSM and like pathing, jungle pathing or something along these lines, right? Was that really like one of your first times entering the content sphere or the famous aspect or something?
Yeah, that is actually the origin story of my career. I think this was back in season 4, so this is like so long ago, in 2014. I actually started making YouTube videos. I actually developed a website that tracked a bunch of competitive League of Legends stuff.
Right.
And then to help, because I wanted to work in esports, right? And to promote the website, I made a bunch of strategy videos because I really felt like a lot of the strategy I think at the time it was LCS, they were just playing the game wrong. And I actually felt like by watching a lot of VODs, and I was a pretty high level player myself, I had a good viewpoint on this. And I just made some YouTube videos on it just in my apartment, and I edited them and I put them on Reddit, and I think I got like 150,000 views on the videos in like 3 weeks. Yeah, so I got like a bunch of job offers from LCS teams almost instantly, which was pretty cool. So, but back at the time, teams didn't have staff. There wasn't a lot of analysts and coaches working with teams, so I was one of the first. So yeah, that's basically how I got my first job at TSM, and that was the old Bjergsen roster with
The odd one and all that shit, right?
Yeah, it was like Bjergsen, and it was like amazing.
Oh, it was when Amazing joined, right? Okay.
Yeah, it was that team. And I think at the time they had Glebe as support as well.
Oh, right.
So it was so I worked through a bunch of the early versions of TSM as basically an online analyst, where I was watching all their scrims, doing match preparation with, I think, Locodoco at the time was my head coach. And I was, I think, very lucky to be working with a very successful NA team.
Yeah, so this split was the Glebe into Lustboy, and Lustboy actually came in during that split, and he remained on, I think, TSM through my whole time there. And I remember we basically kind of won the finals in the classic Game 5, where Wildturtle got the Tristana resets, and it was this huge comeback Game 5 victory in front of a giant crowd. It was really crazy. I was working online at the time, but it was cool, right? My first split working with the team, we won the championship, and then I think in spring I actually got the chance to go and visit the TSM house, and it was really cool back then because people were sleeping on a air mattress in the front hall of the house. Compared to how esports is nowadays, it was just a bunch of guys in a house, and we were just trying to do the best we could to win. And I really liked that I was there in the old developing days of esports. It was wild. It was very, very different.
You have thrown a few names up there I've got to grab at if they dangle before me. So one is obviously the infamous Locodoco. Now, what people don't know is, to me, he's sort of like a little brother to me. So yeah, I'll razz him completely and mock him whenever he says something stupid. But I definitely won't let anyone tell me he's shit and an idiot. Like, this guy knew some things about League of Legends. What would you say about working with Loco? He's obviously one of the first coaches in the West.
I think, yeah, he was actually one of the first coaches in the West, one of the first high-profile coaches in the West. I think actually at the time when he came to TSM, I think he was a very good leader. He really had a vision on how he wanted the team to be run. He had a lot of experience from working in Korean esports, which at the time was a thing. Like, he's obviously a very eccentric personality and a really wild person, and that obviously at times had its difficulties with the org and with his responsibility. And for sure he was not like the perfect coach, but I think for the time he was very effective. And I think he's a smart person too, right? And I owe a lot to him, right? Because he's the one who gave me my first job. So it was definitely an interesting time for sure.
And what about, obviously the jungler in this team was someone else who sort of had controversy around him because it was Amazing. And what people will remember was Amazing's whole shtick was he's the mechanic. I know it's ridiculous if you watch the end of his career, like, but it was actually, he was the mechanics. He was the lead sin guy, wasn't he? Like, if you gave him that, he could carry. But the perception was at the time, does he know macro concepts and stuff? So if you were the guy doing some of the jungle passing stuff, did you actually get to like give him stuff or give him tips and pointers or help him in any way?
Yeah, for sure. I was a jungler myself at the time, and I actually spent a lot of time working with him. Actually, him and Bjergsen is probably the players I worked with the most. And I just remember concepts back then like, wow, if you get ahead in jungle tempo by clearing 4 camps before the enemy, you can base and get wards first, and then you can use that to control the map. And like we figured this out by watching VODs, and this was like this huge thing. And obviously these days it's like, yeah, of course. But these were the sort of things we were looking at. I think he was quite fearless of a player, and at the time his mechanics were very good as well. I actually think that roster was pretty strong. I know you and Amazing and that have the classic argument about the World Championships with that roster in 2014. Yeah, okay. I'm actually on the side of Amazing on this one because I actually saw all of the scrims leading up to that World Championship, and I saw Bjergsen dominate versus basically every single team that was not named Samsung White. And I also think that in that tournament, they also were one of the only teams we were one of the only teams to take a game away from Samsung White as well. And all the other Chinese teams, all the other Korean teams that we faced in scrims were doing so well. I'm actually on Team Amazing on this one. I think that if either the group stage was one game different or we were on the other side of the bracket, there could have been a pretty deep run for NA at that World Championship. I think, actually. Yeah.
Here's a question I have for you though, which goes like this. Being as you've actually had now a lot of success, and people don't know, especially once you get to FNATIC, you start to stack championships. Has there ever actually been an opportunity where you could have coached Bjergsen? It feels like that's like the obvious missing thing in your career. Is it something you wanted?
I don't think so. I think maybe if I had acted differently or done my career differently with my time with TSM, maybe I could have stayed with them and worked with Bjergsen. But just the way things went, the opportunity was never even close to happening. He was usually locked up on teams that had coaches or locked up in teams who had a different direction. And to be completely honest, once I moved to Europe, it seemed like going back to NA would always be like a step down competition-wise. So the opportunity never really came up, no.
And then also, I noticed it lists that you were like in season 5 Worlds, you were the analyst for H2K. Now, to be fair, they didn't do anything at this World. There's no big story there. But if people don't know, that was quite an interesting roster. That was one of the first ones with Odoamne. Obviously, later in your career, you worked with, etc. They had people like Ryu, the other Z, etc. There's some pretty interesting names on this team. Can you give me any stories or any thoughts about this team?
So that was just like a part-time gig just to go to help them for the World Championships. I think the most hilarious part of that one was being there with the team, being like the 3rd seed from EU. This was the 18-0 FNATIC, right, where they were very strong and Origin was very strong, but H2K was definitely a step below. And we just drew the group of death. It was like, I think it was number 1. It was like T1 and like EDG, I believe. And it was almost doomed, I think, from the group draw. You could feel after that group draw that everyone kind of knew that would be a difficult run, and I feel like we were a bit outmatched. But for me, I think that event was very good for just seeing international competition. That was my first time actually attending an international event in person, and just getting to see the way it runs, the challenges you go through, I think was very important. And it was just useful, right? Because the first time as coaching staff you go to an international event, like you're not used to like the feel of it all and the way you need to prepare and how it goes. So it was interesting. And yeah, I got to meet Odo, who I ended up working with later in my career.
Was the young Odoamne anything like the guy that we know now?
He was very talented. I think he was like, you could definitely tell that his laning phase was very good. He could actually pull off playing carry tops even when we were scrimming teams. I think was like, that was when there was a massive gap between Asian teams and European teams. So just seeing that they were able to do that, he was able to pull that off in some matchups was pretty cool. Definitely a bit more raw, a bit more hot-headed back then, I would say. But he's obviously matured with time. That was a very young Odo.
And then after this, you obviously got the call up. You got a head coaching gig. And the sad thing about this one is everyone's going to meme when I even say Immortals season 6. But this actually looked on the paper like I can imagine if you're someone working as an analyst, dude, this is like the movie. The dream is that someone comes to you who has millions of dollars and goes, guy, you can be the head coach and we're going to build a roster where I'm actually just going to buy whoever we want and is available, basically. Like, can you give me the story? There must be some cool story behind this.
Okay. So first of all, that is not how the roster was built at all. There was definitely high aspirations with this roster, but it wasn't, we're going to build a super team no matter what. The main thing was we have the resources to try and build a super team. Will you join us and help build the roster? I had gotten a lot of good press from my times with TSM and made some good impressions, and Noah Winston kind of chose me to help lead the project. And there were many versions of that roster that would look quite different. The Huni Reignover combination, which is probably the main reason we did so well, was like, it was like the last week of off season, and I just got the call, hey, I think we can get Huni and Reignover, which made no sense because they just went 18-0 in Europe and made World semifinals. And it was like the quickest, do whatever you take to do whatever you can to get them right now.
Slam dunk, right?
And there, of course, we had the resources to get them to come over. But I also think that this, when it was created, people did not think we would be a clear number one coming into the season, or even number two. If you actually read what people were saying about this roster back then, Huni and Reignover were perceived as the worst players on 2018 FNATIC, actually.
Okay.
Turtle was perceived as washed. Pobelter and Adrian also weren't perceived as that great of players. Obviously, with the history of what they did years and what ended up happening that year, obviously the roster was insane, but it wasn't actually like that until we went on stage and started winning every single game.
Was there, look, it's up to you. I think the statute of limitations is past that. We're talking about ages ago. Were there any other names that could have been on this team that were interesting?
Yeah, so there was like, people were fighting for GBM, mid laner, because he was a Korean mid laner in LCK, so he must be insane, which I don't think ended up being super strong of a player. We were also looking at actually Cody's son.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like a rookie version of Cody. For obviously he didn't end up playing LCS till many years later. For that position, I think that I'm not sure what would have happened if we didn't get Huni and Reignover, but I'm sure it would have been just like probably import players, right? Just like other D tier Korean players, I think.
So
really remember, to be honest.
Semi-official narrative goes, the Immortals began and they were unbeatable in the LCS spring split and they were definitely going to win the split. But then, this is where the narrative comes in the movie. People go, oh, what happened was when they were scrimming on the other side of the bracket, I think this claim it was like, I can't remember if they said it was CLG, you were practicing somewhere. Whoever you were scrimming, you did the infamous Lucian top and it was going awesome. So you were like, this works, right? This is like a little lace up the sleeve. And then the idea is when you played the other teams, it was like, shit, this doesn't work. I mean, this is the narrative. I'm not saying what happened. Okay. The narrative is you tried it didn't work, and then TSM smashed you, right? So give me the thoughts. What really happened here? Oh, sorry. Go on.
Okay. This is like, I guess it's been long enough. We can go into this one. So basically when I joined this team, it was my first head coaching gig. And I came in extremely motivated, and and what I did is I looked at a lot of data from what I thought was strong in the game right now, and I looked at my players. I came up with like a very template of how we're going to play the game. And from day one, I said, this is how we're going to play the game with defense. Huni is going to go completely crazy. We're going to play, and we're going to dive top every single game. We're going to abuse Enchanter's bot because they were completely broken. And by the time it hit MSI, the whole world realized they were completely broken, by the way. But we were the only team in the world playing anything near that. And we did that, and we went 17-1. Basically, playing through top lane, Huni Reignover carrying the game, playing Enchanter's bot, and playing roaming mids. It was a very unorthodox playstyle, but this was something I created. It was me, actually, that created it, and something I forced on the team for the whole season. Moving into the playoffs, there was a massive meta shift where there was this tank echo, the crazy tank OP stuff.
Yes.
That
if people don't know, basically, the champion was like the fucking, you built the tank items, but it just did mad damage still, right?
Yeah. And then everyone realized you could just build those items on like 20 different champions, and it was just really, really broken. And it also had the added element of scaling being a lot more in playoffs. And moving into this set, there started to be a lot of friction on the team over pick up these tank strategies or not. I'll be honest, Huni was not down, and I couldn't get it through. I was a new coach, and we had just won 17-1 using the strategy of getting through him as carries. And I did try to push this as a backup strat for the team, but it was just like anyone who's been on a team for in esports would understand this. I was unable to get it through and that. And I think that the Lucian top in specific went 15-0 in scrims. It wasn't only working for some teams. The actual number was 15-0. And we went in game 1. Every other team in the world was playing tanks. We lost a 40-minute game with Lucian top, and we just completely crumbled. I didn't know how to fix it because I didn't have backup strats compared. We maybe had a couple game on tanks, but everyone refused to switch, and I didn't know what to do, and we just got 3-0'd, and it was just, that was really brutal. I think I could have handled it a lot better, for sure, but I also think that it was a very tough situation, actually. Even looking back, given the 17-1, given the still crushing everyone in scrims, and given my vision on how I wanted this team to play, I think for my first year as coach, that was a pretty rough one.
And then obviously the bizarrest part, even though people sort of forget the end of this one, is everyone remembers, like, this is where history takes over, and they go, and then what happened was TSM got their shit together because they got Bifrost, and then they just dominated. Yep. And everyone forgets, and then Immortals also dominated, just one series less. And so the summer was going awesome as well. Like, the actual win rate's crazy. Like, how was the summer going, and how did this one fall apart in the playoffs?
So summer split, I think we went 16-2 instead of 17-1. Oh no, it was a disaster split, obviously. We broadened a bit, but it was still a play style where Huni was our main carry of the team. He was our best player as well, to be completely honest. And we lost in 5 games against Cloud9, world spot. I remember that was like one of the saddest days of my career still. That was just completely soul crushing. Also at the time when we did lose, the narrative was that it was my fault, actually. So that was really tough for me to deal with in my first coaching gig, having like the best record any team's ever had over a regular season, but whenever we lose, it's my fault. And yeah, we lost in game 5. I think we actually had like an injured player that day on the best of 5, but I also think that we lost 2 best of 5s against Cloud9, so we kind of lost fair and square, I guess. And this was a world's qualification system, which we didn't make it based on points. And if it had been some of the newer qualification systems, we would have made it because we were actually we were better than CLG, right? We beat in a best of 5 the week before the World's qualifications, but that best of 5 actually didn't qualify us to World. We were the 3rd best team probably by the end of that split, which was pretty good, but it didn't give us the World spot, unfortunately.
There is a player I do need to ask about on this team. It's probably going to surprise people, which is going to be Pobelter, the mid laner, because I've always thought he's one of those players that just essentially shows you, like, how much do you really understand mid lane? Because look, unfortunately, the only people who tend to big him up are just Pobelter fans. Like, everyone else was sort of like, yeah, he's whatever. Yeah. I mean, remember, this is when Jensen and Bjergsen are in the league. Basically, that's the story. It's just Jensen and Bjergsen. Like, dude, every time I've ever watched Pobelter in LCS, the guy's always really fucking good. And he seems like he has a great attitude. Who is this guy? It seemed like, to me, a powerful player. Just maybe his name value wasn't as big.
I always felt in laning phase, he was always a bit behind Jensen and Bjergsen, for sure. Even that year I felt that. But I think he was definitely a winner. I think he won multiple championships his time on Immortals, and even on his time on Immortals. He was just a very smart player. He really understood the game very well. He really played a ton of champions. And he also was good at like just overall macro stuff, leading the team, when we should go Baron, when we should not go Baron. He was really handling a lot of those decisions. And although maybe he wasn't like a superstar player carrying for most of his career, knowing what I know about that aspect of him, it makes sense why he won so many of those championships later in his career when he was playing with other, like the Impact Doublelift roster, right? Where they won a bunch of times. He's good at killing the Nexus, which ultimately is pretty important.
And then the other player is just because he's sort of I think almost maligned at this point in time because of those early TSM things like the game cribs and then like the TSM legends and then the fact that everyone like drama always followed TSM. So anytime TSM lost and Wildturtle did like a flash forwards, it was all Wildturtle's fault. He was basically the scapegoat of the team all the time. So in your team, he had kind of his revival and he wasn't on TSM. And I feel like this is when he should have gotten his due. Sadly, if he'd got the title, maybe he would have. But I feel like this is when he could have actually sort of proven he was just a really good fucking ADC, right?
But I feel like he had results for many years. He even had like the Flycast quest run back many years later. I think he was one of the most talented NA born players to play for sure. Definitely a bit over aggressive at times. I think the perception of him as bad is just wrong. But I think the perception of his overall play style is like maybe a bit over aggressive and making some mistakes sometimes, but very, very mechanically talented. I think that's accurate. Like I think the people who have that view of him, it's pretty much what it was. And I think sure he was very strong on my team as well.
When you say people, the fans blamed you,
yeah.
I mean the obvious cynical thing as an outsider, but in the industry would be, it looks like Immortals blamed you. You weren't there after that, right? So what happened?
Yeah, I think I got scapegoated a bit for that one for sure. But I don't think I was completely innocent, right? Like okay. I think if you put me now with the experience I have coaching in League of Legends back on the team, I would have won championships with them. I don't know if I would have won both, but for sure would have done so much better. Like there's just so many things you learn about these situations where a player refuses to play a champion. What do you do? Player is really upset at another player because he's not practicing enough. What do you do? There's so many of these scenarios, and you just learn about techniques. You learn how to see the problems earlier. You learn how to fix the stuff. You learn how to prepare a draft for a playoff set. Like this TSM set was my first time preparing a draft for a playoff set in my entire career. So when we didn't have proper backup plans and the bans were too locked and not adaptable enough, and I didn't have some like how do you learn that?
Yes.
I had some experience from working with Loco for sure, but I wasn't really there in the moment when he had to make those decisions between the games. And I think that's something's learned through experience. And that's something I'm still learning. Like I feel like I dropped some best ofs this year because I did some stuff incorrectly. So like I definitely wasn't innocent that year, but I also think that crafting the playstyle of the team and doing all the lane swaps and stuff was a lot of stuff I did very well too.
It sounds like you were basically learning what I hope either fans have learned over the years and been a bit naive there, or they're learning while they listen now, which is everyone thinks it's like, do the draft right, you idiot. And it's like, mate, the draft's like 10% of it, mate. Like you say, half of it's like, to even do a draft, I have to get buy-in from this player here. Even if he wants that champion, maybe the bot lane won't agree to play what it takes to enable. You know, there's so many factors that the joke is they have nothing to do with the draft or League of Legends knowledge. It's like you said, it's coaching experience, right?
Yeah, it's there's like a whole process to preparing for a best of series that it's just there's a lot to it. It's really fun, but that's why it's fun, right? That's why I love it. Along
these lines, though, one thing I would ask, maybe you've just done a good job in this sense. You seem very mild mannered. You seem soft spoken compared to. I mean, for instance, if you just contrast, you would think like what the TSM environment's like. So I think some people would wonder: do you have like a personality? Did you have a presence as a coach? Were you forceful if you needed to be? Could you argue with people?
Back on Immortals, I had some arguments with my players for sure. For sure, there were some heated moments. And I think in my actual coaching, when I'm actually leading a team, I actually think I'm very mild, especially not these days. Okay. I am a nice person. I'm a kind person. So I definitely don't fit that like traditional sports scream at the team type of coach, but I don't think I'm soft spoken. I think on most of the coaching staff I've worked with for the past years, I'm probably one of the outspoken and critical people, I would say.
Even though the team had this sort of like success in the regular season and then struggles in the playoffs, one of the results of it was, people might remember, it got Reignover supposedly like $1 million contract at the time, which was enormous, to go to Team Liquid, because everyone was saying, I remember Locodoco told me this, every jungler supposedly said, like, basically once Reignover came into Immortals, you had to like relearn how to play jungle. He was doing all concepts they didn't understand or went to path or whatever, right? You worked with him. Was the hype real? Was this guy some wizard?
Reignover, especially on pathing junglers, was just so smart. Like he would be very good at cycling the enemy jungle, and those were the days where if you got 3 quadrants of enemy jungle, the game would just like be so unplayable.
There was no
for the
catch-up
enemy.
XP back then, guys.
Yeah, and it was just, he was very good at doing that. And then if he would switch and play like a jungler like Elise where he needed to gank, he would just drop all of his camps and just dive and go crazy. Like he really understood what his champion needed to do. He understood how to pass. I think mechanically, I don't think he was the strongest actually. And I think that's something that maybe on other teams, I think he was also struggling with an injury. I'm not sure if it's something I should even say, but he was struggling with a wrist.
I think I heard on Team Liquid he had something, yeah.
He was struggling with a wrist injury, and I'm sure that over time made his mechanics struggle, right? But I can just tell how he went into coaching because he was such a smart player, and I'm sure he's a good coach now. I do think, though, the carry of that team was for sure Huni. Huni was the one saying, come top now, come dive top now, we go here, we do this, we're going Baron. He was definitely the life of that team. He was the soul of that team. So as much as Reignover's pathing was incredible, as far as who was the driving force behind that Immortals roster, it was just Huni 100%.
After this is why I'd say it looks like you got blamed. You end up going to Team EnVyUs. And even though I will say, for people who don't know esports, Team EnVyUs, the organisation, is massive. Like, they're huge in COD, and they had a CSGO team that had won championship. So they're actually a huge org. But if you look at the roster they've given you, man alive, mate. If you've gone from, like, what might on paper be not really a super team in Immortals, but, like, players that can all be the best of their roles, this is some, like, you know, you're in the fucking porn stars at this point. PAWN, as in, like, you're just like, right, oh, this guy's Korean. Well, it's not really the Korean top lane I was thinking of, but yeah, okay, I guess. Oh, these guys are okay. NA players, like, all right. And then you're looking across the lineup, it's like, aside from Lyra, who everyone gave props to as a jungler, everyone actually just thought this team sort of sucked. How do you get this roster? What happens to get this gig?
So I basically was looking for a job very late in off season due to what happened with Immortals. So it was a very rough time for me. I definitely had a lot of bad press from my Immortals time. So this very well could have spelled the end of my League of Legends coaching career. And I really am so thankful that it wasn't. And honestly, I'm thankful that I got the chance to work with Envy, right? That you even get a chance to have a head coaching job in League at all, I think is pretty cool. I do remember boot camping for that season in Korea. And we were scrimming. We weren't scrimming LCK teams. We weren't scrimming LCK Challenger teams. We weren't scrimming NA LCS teams. We were scrimming NA Academy teams. And I remember I had no stay on the roster. I remember scrimming some of these teams, right? And my mid laner was going 0-10-0 against NA Academy mids, and we were losing full scrim blocks against NA Academy mids. And that's back when there was relegations where you could lose your LCS slot.
Yes.
And I remember having some calls and making some warning bells ringing to upper management that this not good, right? You don't want to lose your LCS spot if you can't even beat academy teams. And I am so grateful that he didn't get relegated that split. That would have been a complete disaster. And to have a team relegate under my lead would have just been like, that's such a huge loss for an organization. We won the final game, game 5. I remember working so hard for the last bet and us all staying up being like draft until like 1 a.m. to just try and make it work. And it was a wild split for sure.
I have a question about that match because I am friends with Locodoco, and spoiler, that lives rent-free in his head. Because if people don't know, his team, actually, by the way, the roster looks fire. He had Solo top lane, Thorin jungle, Phoenix, the Korean mid laner. He had Mashme ADC, was still decent. He had Madlife, literally Madlife, guys, was the fucking support player. It was older Madlife, of course, but even so, man, still pretty sick to have Madlife in your fucking NA team. Right, on paper, I mean, he even tells me, like, he was supposed to win this, and you stole the spot from him or whatever. Like, what do you think? Were you scared of this match? It was a 3-2.
Oh, I was terrified. Of course, it was 3-2 for an LCS slot. I remember it was like Ori Syndra matchup all 5 games, and it's just funny these days when you're talking about draft. It's like, we do with the ban these 2 champions, pick this, and then they counter pick, and then they dive your lane because they push here and they can invade here. And back then, the argument we're having is like, should we play Orianna versus Syndra, or should we play Syndra versus Orianna? And that was like the big debate you used to have the draft in League of Legends. It's so funny, actually. The game has come such a long way. And back then, I think the win rate on stage was like 52 to 48% for Syndra. That was the edge you were getting.
So here's the question then. If people don't know, a little bit I know behind the scenes, and obviously maybe you'll correct me, it's your interview, not mine, mate. I've heard the story goes like this. So you didn't, despite what people think, start 2017 with FNATIC. You didn't just go straight from Envy to FNATIC. What happened was they had the infamous Nico the Pico. He had his boys, Bjergsen and Caps. This was all, for a while, it was maybe going all right. Then I've heard basically internally everything blew up. Like maybe, I won't discredit him as a coach. I've just heard maybe he wasn't like the best like leadership figure. Maybe that was the angle. He didn't have the room. They didn't have the ear of the players, as they say in the lingo of coaching. Basically, they took him out. Is it just because like, I mean, it's the middle of the season. How do you get this call up to come and get FNATIC? Like, you look at the players you got now. Like, what the fuck? You go from Envy sitting out, and then you're in FNATIC. How does this happen?
I worked with Jesses as an assistant coach on Immortals the year before. He saw my work as a coach, and he actually thought I was very good at my, which I appreciate. And it's another one of those ones where people come through for you, and he strongly recommended I be tried out as a coach for FNATIC. And then they flew me to Korea. I met Caps, I met that whole roster, and they really liked my work, and I ended up getting the job there. So it was through connections, as most things happen in the world, I suppose.
What I actually like, Dylan, is that the reason why a great movie script or story I actually think resonates with humans is because I do think there are archetypes and sort of like journeys that we go on, and you have to do it that way. Like you don't, like in the same way in the movie, you wouldn't fight the final boss 30 minutes in, win, and then have like another hour of the movie, because it doesn't make sense. You got to work you probably have to lose to the boss early on. It looks like the same fucking patterns playing out, mix. If you remember, this team was really good in the summer, and it's like, right, it should be G2 against FNATIC in the final. G2's waiting at the final. FNATIC doesn't get there. What happened?
Oh, this was actually, there's so many disasters over the years now that I'm
but here's the thing: we can laugh now that you get to the championships later, and now it's cool,
Yeah, and that was cool that you end up winning after, but at the time, these things were just absolute disasters. In scrims, we were by far the strongest team. Caps was just an absolute monster. We had Caps Rekkles, right? That was it. It was in 2018. It was insane, and
this is when Rekkles is really good as well. Really?
But this is rookie Caps, right? This is 17-year-old Caps. This can go 20-0 or 0-10
right.
Caps. Can randomly not sleep for a whole night and then show up to your day and grief your whole day, and just he was young, he was a kid, and he's a very special kid. And we were the best team in scrims. We were the number one team in the regular season, and it was just a classic meltdown day in the semifinals against Misfit. And I think in hindsight, they had a pretty decent roster. They had Hansama, they had Alfari, right?
It's the one that took the SKT to 5 games, if people remember.
So I think in hindsight, we didn't actually lose to like the worst team ever, but we're definitely stronger. But the main thing I remember from that series is we played a lot of, the mid matchup was like Syndra, Orianna, Cassiopeia. And I remember that I had some data that Cassiopeia on stage was just like winning so many games, and we scrimmed it. We scrimmed it a lot. I think we were crushing G2 in scrims playing it, and he was just killing perks every game, and that was making me really confident in the pick. And I remember Caps before the series, he comes to me and says, "Dylan, I know you really want us to pick Cassio early, but if we play against Misfits and they just lock in Syndra and they camp mid with like a champ like Zach or a champ like I actually was specifically Syndra Zach. He told me before the match,
right?
I cannot play the game, Dylan. I cannot play the game if we do this. Please don't do this." And I said, no, this is what we're gonna do. We won with it so much. We won with it so much in scrims. First game, we lock in Cassio. They go exactly Zach Syndra. They camp mid. Caps goes 0-5-0 in the first game, which in a competitive game, that's pretty extreme. And it really, let's just say, set the whole set in a bad momentum. Everyone on the team was really upset, was really tilted, and we were just trying to like come up with some stuff. And by the end, I think our bot lane draft got really bad. We were banning all 3 of Rekkles' champions on red side when it's the champs he plays.
Okay.
And like there was almost no communication backstage between the games. Like I didn't know what the fuck to do, and it was like honestly it felt like the Immortals won. And I remember after that, people were saying, "Oh, Dylan Falco coach, regular season god, choke in playoffs." And I kind of believed it a bit because it
That's what I was going to ask, because the problem is...
It actually happened that way, yeah.
The problem is, as much as like you want to believe, like, oh no, who cares what other people think and all that jazz that people say is copium. By the way, everyone cares what other people think to some degree. We all want to be liked and accepted and validated and to people, because part of actually how we see ourselves is part of what is reflected back from the world. So if forget even the flame dude, if I just had these 3 experiences, I would have to think, shit, is it me? Like I'm the only connective factor. Like, am I doing something wrong? Because as you say, something you're doing is right, but then at some point it goes wrong. Like, so was it in your head?
Oh, of course. Like when I have these things and they go wrong, I reflect on them like a huge amount. And like even to this day, the way in modern League of Legends we prepare for best of 3s or best of 5s, the way I think about it, the way we do it, it's like I spend a lot of time questioning how to do things. Because at the end of the day, your decisions when you're doing match preparations can just turn losses into wins or wins into... Like, people will flame the players, or ultimately the players are playing the game. But if you had an all-knowing eye, if you had an all-seeing thing, there like usually is a way to actually make a game plan to win, right? So yeah, I thought about it a lot. And I think I just try and take something from every set I lost. And I think for sure I wasn't innocent in those early playoff meltdowns, for sure. That being said, I was also working with some like young players in the FNATIC case, for example. Like I think that team was very, very prone to meltdown. And I think there's many coaches that may have had a meltdown at some point if they were coaching that team. So I think it's as always, it's a combination of things.
There was also another question I had, which is when you raised the topic of like the Dylan one, the Caps one, where he told you like, don't do this draft. And you were sort of like, I'm going to sort of overrule you because it's just going to work. Like, it's just the right move, mate.
It's been working so much. Yeah.
Yeah. This is like if people don't know, this is probably the biggest like dividing razor between fucking types of coaches. Because I'll give you an example. I used to be mates with Prolly back in the day from H2K. And I used to always say to him, why would on game 5 would you let Ryu pick like LeBlanc here? He's not going to 1v9 the game. And he was like, yes, but why? My philosophy is if it's game 5 and everything's on the line, I just say to my player that I think's my star, you tell me what you want. And then I trust that he knows what to pick and lock in. And then I want to give him confidence and I just hope it works basically after that. And the funny thing about this is that might sound stupid if you know he loses the game. Obviously, if you carried on LeBlanc, you look like a genius. At the same time, though, I get the sense he was also sort of saying, I don't want to tell him don't pick that and then lose the game as well. And then him be like, but if I'd have picked that and then the what ifs, it's sort of like you want to just know whether it work off the play. In this scenario, what would you say your thoughts were on that particular topic? You were still on the idea of like, if it works best in theory, we should do it?
I've always tried to be adaptable with that one. I think like the coach authority on draft pick thing has always been like a big discussion in the scene, sorry. But I feel like it's so much more deep and complicated than that. There's been so many times in career I've just said like, no, shut up, we're picking this. It's just what's going to win us the game. What is just going to win us the game? Trust me. But there's also been just as many times where I've been like, I trust you, just go for what you want to pick. I think the most effective I find is usually trying to give choices to try and railroad the draft and strategy down a path I wanted to take, but give some agency to players and exactly what they're playing in the scenarios. I think that's usually what has given me the most success because they usually are able to see a lot of the more nuance. They know whether Syndra or Orianna is better in a specific scenario, but I can see that we really need to pick mid first 3 and it really needs to be a mage, So if I had to go with one, it would be like that sort of approach. But I think your job as a coach isn't to have authority over the draft, and your job as coach isn't to not have authority over the draft. Your job as coach is just to win the fucking game.
Yes.
So I just try and do whatever I think is going to do that.
As I said, this is actually one of those years where you can tell people don't watch the shows or they don't have a good memory, mate. If people don't know, dude, season 7 Summer Rekkles, love that Rekkles, mate. That's my favourite Rekkles. That's the Rekkles that isn't playing like passive and back. This guy, there's a reason he won. By the way, he should have won the MVP. He was a fucking stud. Like that Rekkles I loved. So give me some thoughts on this guy at the time and coaching him.
He did win the MVP that split, right? That's the one where we were playing for third place and he was crying. Yeah, that one. Yeah. Oh, for sure. That was, I'm going to carry the game no matter what, Rekkles. That was his approach. Obviously, like, it can have its own greedy aspects to it, which we struggle with sometimes, but it was really working. He was playing very well. yeah, I think your analysis is right. Like, I think that was one of the better versions of Rekkles for sure.
And then after this, when you went to Worlds, the people forget this storyline because, dude, this one, if you'd had a documentary crew with you at this Worlds, this would be the shit, mate. This one is such a fucking banger because if people remember, the group couldn't have started any worse. It couldn't have started any worse than it did. And then all I remember was mainly, he was my boy. It was mainly, I just remember sOAZ doing that thing where it's like, if you give me these two champions, basically, even though I'm a bloody top laner, I could somehow like win the game. Like, give me some thoughts on how this got turned around. Because at the point, the funny thing is, you must have thought, I've got the worlds, I'm fucking gonna crash out. I'm gonna go 0-6 or something.
But this is the same meltdown version of FNATIC, right? That we lost in Europe, even though we were the best team. And then we go to Worlds and we go 0-4 in our first 4 group stage matches. And let me just tell you, behind the scenes, things were not going too well.
I mean, I believe the stat was no team that's ever gone 0-4 ever got over group. That was like something like that, right?
We had scrim sets between after those losses. We're losing every single game, and people are saying they're not going to play with anyone ever again anymore. And just like, oh my God, it was a complete disaster. But what I can say about all those players, and I think in hindsight, it makes sense, right? They were really clutch. They really have heart. Players like Caps, sOAZ, Rekkles, like they've had those experiences on the big stage, and I guess we had a lot of luck as well. I think we needed every single other team to win their matches specifically. And I don't know, that one was wild. That was the first of, I guess, like I did the Schalke Miracle one as well, right? But that one was almost crazier. I'm actually not sure which one was crazier. Maybe the Schalke one was a bit crazier, but I don't know. Double tiebreakers at World Championships. I think these days it's different, right? Because there's so many more Korean and Chinese teams in groups as well. Like I will say, the teams we had to beat to do that miracle run were not the strongest teams. It was like NA and Vietnam only, I think, that we won against. But we'll take it.
What would you say about this period of success? I'm trying to get it in now because obviously Season 8 comes next and we all know it ain't a great ending for sOAZ due to injury, things were put. So the reason I have the question about sOAZ goes like this. As I alluded to there, the most weird thing about sOAZ at the time was, look, top laners in the West could either carry, it was really reductive, play tanks and bruisers, and mostly they did just sit in lane. And a lot of people might not know back then, people didn't think of top lanes as very cerebral. You just sit in a bloody lane and you hope you don't get ganked, right? This guy is one of the first players that made me understand a concept. Like you said, he just kills the Nexus. It's like he doesn't always win lane. He doesn't have to have counter pick. But I tell you what, he understands how to win a game from a situation. He understands when there's an angle you can do something. Give me some thoughts on sOAZ.
Yeah, he in 2017, and I guess I can even say 2018 as well, he was very, very good at being stable. He was very, very good at playing weak side. He had a lot of tricks. He was a very tricky player. He was very good at baiting you in to like try and gank you and then flash over the wall, dash away and waste your flash and get away. He was very like, he would do some crazy rune setups or item builds where he could survive a dive, and like he was very smart, I would say. He was very smart and he was very good at being a stable player. I think those are his strengths for sure. And he was very good at a bunch of like the tanks champs. I think he wasn't excelling too much at carries already at that point, for sure. But yeah, like you said, he was definitely a Nexus killer.
Right. Obviously, one of the changes is, as well as Whipple was waiting in the wings, but doesn't come in at the beginning of this next year, the key change, obviously, is Jezis came out as the support and in came Hylissang. Now, this is what's ridiculous, because now everyone's going to think, oh, I know who Hylissang is. This is Unicorns Love Hylissang. Who was Unicorns Love Hylissang? Because from my perspective back then, he was sort of considered like a good player on a bad team, and he was really raw and stuff. Who was he when you got him?
I think we thought he was one of the best. He was maybe the best support in Europe. And I think a lot of people in the scene thought that as well. Right. Because although that Unicorns of Love team is not like really known for winning championships, I think they made the finals 3-4 times. They got second place. Yeah. But they also never ended up making Worlds, I believe, at the end of the year. So it's like they made a bunch of different spring finals, and in all of those, it was usually Hilly and PoE was like the duo that everyone thought these two were the really good players on that team. So and also Hilly's 80s on his UOL days were often a bit questionable, I would say. He wasn't playing with super strong AD players, so I think everyone thought he was one of the top 2-3 supports in Europe, honestly. I think maybe to like the general public it wasn't known as that, but to us it was pretty obvious he was going to be insane.
What was it like to use him in Season 8 then? Because this is when you're on a top team, all the lights are on you and people started to see, this is where for me he built the rep of what he has now, which is like, essentially, he can just be the best. But I've always thought it's like this. I don't think you can even talk about him as a support player. He's kind of like the Caps of support to me. It's like even the angles. I always said this. He has that thing where they like say like, you know, the thing about they say something like, you know, a very good marksman can hit a target no one can hit, but a genius can hit a target no one can see. Like it's the idea. Like I didn't even know that angle was possible. Like what the fuck? Like what was he going for there? Like was he like this back then in Season 8? Was he the guy who would just find some mental angle or do some movie? Like what are you doing? But then it might work.
So he was fearless, mega aggressive. The exact version of Hylissang everyone knows from all these years past. But the funny thing about that year is I actually made him play Braum, I think, in almost 40 games.
That's a war crime, though.
Yeah.
Hylissang would make him play Braum.
It was actually, I kind of jailed him for the whole year, and I was actually very grateful that he was open-minded and he was fine with it, because it really, really worked, and we really had our formula. And I think the way I used him on that team wasn't the way he was used on some of the other teams, but it really just allowed, I think, Rekkles to shine. It was like such a strict 2 carry system on that team with Rekkles Caps that it was just like strict 2 carries and everyone else just like enables. And we played that way the whole year, and I think it was really good that like we found something that worked well for us.
For people who don't know the personality of Hylissang, maybe some of it comes through on camera because he's a joker, but I don't know if people know that I've heard he's a very sensitive individual. Actually, he can get quite upset and quite feel like if things are going bad, if he feels blamed or things are going bad. I've heard actually he takes a lot in internally.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I definitely he's more on the sensitive side. And that even though we won like everything that year, that Season 8 FNATIC had as every FNATIC roster, I think, has no fair share of issues and problems behind the scenes. And yeah, it was hard sometimes. But we also had a very like positive group of people, and we did a lot of team stuff together. I think Jory was great for that. We just played so many games together, and Caps is such an uplifting person as well. So it worked out well. I think it was a good roster for him to succeed on.
When I make content, it isn't just me, the mic, and a guest or a topic. It's also me with the support of my whole crew. Who's that, you might ask? The Skrilluminati. That's who. They include Frisky, Matt Pugnaccio Racula, Ahmed Hadju, Tosh, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Gore, Animosity, Toucan, and you know it if you've heard it before, but if you haven't, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Well, if you want to know upcoming topics and guests I'm going to have on my channel, maybe you want to ask me a question to answer in an AMA in video fashion. Do you want to hear one of those long discussions and actually be part of it and be able to ask me questions? Want to find out who I'm going to interview next? If any of these perks or more appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.